Yo, it's your boy Logos. And if you don't mind, I want to go on this little Jordan Peterson history binge. This time he talks about victimhood leading to genocide. I wonder if you're going to bring up communism or Marxism and all the genocide and suffering it caused for the Russian people and the surrounding territories of countries that was part of the Soviet Union. This seems like a very relevant video to watch, especially as I go through this Truth About Black Republicans video where this guy's a black Marxist and he's pushing MLK and saying he's a socialist and all these other things, as if just because MLK or Malcolm X supported socialism or Marxism, I'm supposed to just switch my mind up and get in line too. But let's get into Jordan Peterson and see what he has to say.
One of the things that Maya and I found when we were writing this paper, we were looking at the discourse that precedes genocide in genocidal states, and the enhancement of a sense of victimization on the part of one of the groups, usually the group that's going to commit the genocide. First of all, their sense of being victims is much heightened by the demagogues who are trying to stir up this sort of hatred. So they basically say, look, you've been oppressed in a variety of ways, and these are the people who did it, and they're not going to stop doing it, and this time we're going to get them before they get us. It's something like that. And so there's something very pathological about the enhancement of victimization, which is, well, see, that the problem as far as I'm concerned with it is it's not thought through very well, because there's a point that's being made, and the point is that people have been oppressed and they suffer, and that's true, that point, but then the proper framework from within which to interpret that, I believe, is that that's characteristic of life. You can't take it personally in some sense, and you can't divide the world neatly into perpetrators and victims, and you certainly can't divide the world neatly into perpetrators and victims and then assume that you're only in the victim class and then assume that that gives you certain, like, access to certain forms of redress, let's say. It gets dangerous very rapidly if you do that sort of thing. So, for example,
before he goes further, I just want to say a big part of why I don't support that type of thinking too is because they don't even have all the information. They just assume somebody is a victim or an oppressor because of the color of their skin or their wealth, economic status, or gender, or any other intersection term nonsense they heard in college nowadays. It's really dangerous because they're so radical and they be so emotional and upset when they go to these town halls or try to have these quote-unquote debates. They love to bring out megaphones and try to drown out people instead of just having a normal conversation and then somebody disagree or agree with you based on merit and evidence. And it's really sad to see, and it's never convincing to me. I just find them funny or sometimes distressing, simply because of the fact that if more people start thinking like these crazy radical young people, then it's hard for our country to be prosperous and improve on the stuff we need to improve on.
one of the things that characterized the Soviet Union, and this was particularly true in the 1920s, but afterwards, so the Soviets were very much enamored of the idea of class guilt. So, for example,
Class guilt, look at what you're going through nowadays in the United States, it seems more of line to race guilt. I said in a previous video, it seems to me and Jordan Peterson, after me watching Jordan Peterson, he seemed confirm this stuff too, that these people are now just taking the Marxist class warfare and using that plus race history and race warfare and stuff like that to push an ideology, especially in the West.
although it was only about 40 years previously that the serfs had been emancipated, they weren't much more than slaves, right? And so that was the bulk of the Russian population. They were bought and sold along with the land. So they had been emancipated, and some of them, many of them had turned into independent farmers, and some of them had become reasonably prosperous because, at least in principle, I presume a certain proportion of them from being crooked, but I presume a larger proportion from actually being able to raise food. And of course, at that time, the bulk of the Russian food population was produced by these relatively successful peasant farmers. And relatively successful would mean maybe they had a brick house or something, and maybe they had a couple of cows, and maybe they were able to hire a few people. And so, you know, it wasn't like they were massive landowners or anything. But I've talked to you a little bit about the Pareto principle and the notion that in any domain of activity, a small proportion of people end up producing most of what's in that domain of activity. The same was true in Russia with regards to these peasant farmers. Some of them were extraordinarily efficient, and they produced most of Russia's food. When the communists came in, they described those landholders as parasites, essentially, predicated on the Marxist idea that if someone had extracted profit from an enterprise, that they had basically stolen that profit from the people, say, that they had employed or otherwise oppressed. And so you could be a member of the kulak, K-U-L-A-K, K-U-L-A-K. You could be a member of the kulak class. And then because you were a member of that class, you were automatically guilty. And so what happened was, and you got to think this through to really understand what happened. So what happened was the intellectual communists were sent out in cadres out into these little towns to find people who would help them round up the kulaks. Now you got to think about what a small town is like, because
You know everybody.
so imagine you're in a town and there's 3 or 4 people or maybe 10 people or something like that who are a little more successful than everyone else. And a certain number of people are going to be fine with that and maybe even happy about it because they regard those people as particularly productive and, you know, as stalwart members of the community, regardless of their flaws. But there's going to be some people who are not happy about it at all, that are going to be very resentful about that and jealous. And so those are going to be people whose characters, I would say, are of the less positive type. And so when the intellectuals came in and described the reason that these people should be treated as parasites and profiteers, then it was the resentful minority in those towns, and that would be the kind of guy that hangs around in the bar all the time and is completely unconscientious and fails at everything and then blames everyone else for it. The intellectuals came in and said, this is unfair that this happened to you. You've actually been victimized, and now it's your opportunity to go have your revenge.
What he's saying and describing sound very similar to what I'm hearing nowadays, especially right here from Marxists and leftists, including the black Marxist guy that I'm reacting to right now. They blame other people for their issues, or they say people got successful on the backs of others. They didn't put any thought, work, or effort to their success. They just stole it or did some underhanded tactic to take away from the poor or impoverished. They don't consider the fact that maybe the impoverished people didn't come up with that idea. They didn't work as hard. They're not as competent. Maybe they're lazy. They don't consider the fact that the guy that is successful worked a long time. They used to be poor themselves. They was poor for the majority of their life. And within the past, maybe 3 to 5 years, maybe 10 years, now they're successful. They don't consider that stuff. They just walk in, see the situation, how the person is now, and make a value judgment on them. And they're willing to wipe away people's lives and future because they're so resentful and jealous of stuff that they have that they don't. And they think they're, I don't know, wise, enlightened, nice, or just caring about everybody. But they're really just vindictive and power hungry. And they're very evil and conniving, if you ask me.
And so that's exactly what happened. Now, in some of the villages, sometimes the peasants would actually surround the farmsteads of these more successful people and try to defend them, but that never worked out for very long. And so then these angry mobs would go into the farmhouses and strip the place right down to nothing. And they packed these people up and sent them on trains with no food out to Siberia, where there was no place to live. And so they were packed into houses, you know, maybe they had a square meter each to live in, and all their children died of typhoid, and many of them froze to death. Many people died. Millions of people died as a.
But they don't talk about that. They want to say we need to implement Marxism or socialism, and because so and so is a radical leftist or this, that, and the other, that's evidence of why black people need to go along with socialism, radicalism, or anything like that. They don't talk about the evil that goes along with dictating people into groups based on economic status and just viewing people as the amount of money they work or the amount of money that they have. And when certain vindictive, evil people get into power, with that mindset to do evil, messed up stuff like this and ship out millions of people who did nothing more but be productive and good at a skill. And because you're jealous and you want to take power from them, and you feel in your heart for some reason they don't deserve it, you'll ship them off somewhere where they'll get killed, or you just put a bullet in their head yourself. And these people expect us to just go along with it, or think they make sense, or expect they're kind, and they just care about the welfare of the people. Nah, it's really just seeming to me like they're just power hungry, and they're just angry and upset about their own lot in life. But I really don't care about how angry you are about what you decide to do with your life. That doesn't give you the right to fuck shit up for everybody else. Get your own shit together. Nobody owes you anything.
The consequence of the dekulakization, at least as a consequence of its total effect. So what happened then was that there wasn't any food produced. And so then 6 million Ukrainians starved to death in the 1920s, which is something you never hear about, right?
Oh.
You never hear about that. Why do you never hear about that? That's a question worth asking. You know, it was an absolute catastrophe. They used to, so these people were starving, right to the point of cannibalism, right? I mean, it was ugly as anything you could possibly imagine. If you were a mother and so you're supposed to hand all your grain into the central committee, mostly for distribution into the cities. You didn't get to keep any for yourself. And so maybe then afterwards, if you were a mother, you'd go out in the fields that had already been harvested, and you'd pick up individual grains of wheat. And if you didn't turn those in, that was death for you. So that's how far it was pushed. So
because and they'll twist it in some type of crazy warped ideology like, well, you were being selfish, you weren't thinking about the community, you didn't give it in first so it could be shared with everybody, so therefore you're a threat to the society as a whole, and we can't let you and your potentially poisonous need for food be a risk to everybody else, so you gotta die, or you have to move out in a place so remote you'll die in a week or two anyway. It's just crazy to me that people can just go along with this and say we should try this now, United States. After it's literally like 100 years since this death of the kulaks have happened, and this is just one situation and one era and one country where this happened in. It's not even going into Cambodia or China or Vietnam or any of these other socialist totalitarian states where they redistribute wealth and take away stuff from the people and distribute in a number of different ways, and we're just supposed to expect that everything will be fine and good and our whole life won't be messed up. Crazy. I'm supposed to trust that you won't mess up the whole government and everything how we've been living for the past however long. I'm supposed to trust that won't happen and my kids won't starve to death because of you. I'm not taking that chance.
well, so that's a little story about how victimization, how the idea of victimization and perpetration can get out of hand extraordinarily rapidly. And so whenever people are beating the victim drum, you know, they'll cover that up with empathy, roughly speaking. We're speaking on behalf of the oppressed. It's like, maybe you are, but maybe you're no saint because, you know, you're so sure that you're a saint and you're only speaking from the position of good.
I just want to stop before it goes to the next video because I am on the old playlist. I'm just react to them back to back. But he brought up a very good point. I don't really, it's hard for me to trust anybody that says they got the key or the solution to everything. That they're just a know-it-all. And they say if I had the power or if I just had the influence or control, everything would be perfect. You're fallible. You're human just like the rest of us. If you're that arrogant and egotistical to feel that way, I'm highly doubtful of the fact that you'll be willing to listen to any input or feedback from somebody that is not somebody that will just say what you want to hear. And if somebody says something to you that you don't like, you may get violent with them, and maybe not just with them, maybe their family and their circle, because you're vengeful or you're quote unquote afraid of that ideology or thinking being permeated to other people besides them who you feel targets your power. But that's just me. It's your boy Logos, and I'll talk to you next time.